So, welcome back, guys. I see a little more of you woke up at lunchtime. We have Nico Vermeir right here, and if you're using .NET, this will be the most probably interesting highlight of today for you. Therefore, he's going to talk about .NET 7 that was released yesterday?
Yes.
It was released yesterday. Okay, even I'm interested, and I don't really know what that is. So, good luck, and
Thank you.
yep.
Right. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining me here right before lunch. As was just mentioned, the last time I did this talk was with the very first release candidate of .NET 7. Yesterday, they decided to release it the day before this session. So I've spent yesterday evening updating Visual Studio on hotel Wi-Fi, installing .NET 7, and trying out all my demos. I only had time to try them out once, so I'm as excited as you are to see what will happen. Once again, thank you for joining me. My name is Nico. I'm an application architect in Belgium at a consultancy company called Real Dolman. I've been an MVP for 9 years now. I run a user group in Belgium called Madden. We focus on front-end development. I'm also part of the Visual Studio user group there. Done a bunch of other stuff. I released a .NET 6 book last year. So if you don't care about .NET 7, but you do care about .NET 6, buy my book. All right, you can follow me on Twitter, on Mastodon as well, apparently, but I have not updated the slide yet. What are we going to talk about today? First of all, .NET. What versions are there? What's the support story behind it? Because now that .NET 7 is there, does not mean that .NET 6 is done for. On the contrary, we will talk about this. And then we'll dive into new features. And the most important one, or the most obvious one, is the new version of C#, C# 11. We'll dive into some C# features, and then we'll dive into .NET 7 itself. Some cool new stuff there. Of course, there will be quite a few demos, both of C# 11 and .NET 7. And then I have some other cool stuff that's in there that I personally did not find interesting enough to do a demo about, given the time that we have. But I still want to mention these things. And then hopefully maybe we'll have some time for questions. Before we get started, I'm assuming everyone here is a .NET developer, or at least interested in .NET, right? Who is doing .NET 6 right now? Right, .NET 5? Okay, a couple. .NET 4 and earlier? Oh, you poor souls. I'm hoping that with this session, you will have enough ammunition to go to your boss, your company, your customer, and at least try to persuade them to upgrade to newer versions. But which version? We'll come back to this one in a moment. Which version? Because currently there are two active versions of .NET. .NET 6, .NET 7 are both under support right now. As mentioned, .NET 7 was released yesterday, or 2 days ago actually. And this is a standard supported release, meaning that they will provide updates and patches for this for 18 months, not longer. .NET 6, on the other hand, is a long-term release, meaning ever since it was released last year in 2021, there will be updates and it will be supported up until 2024. And this is the way that the versioning scheme of .NET works. The even-numbered versions are long-term support releases with supports up to 3 years. The odd-numbered releases, those are standard support with support for 18 months. So that's interesting to know, because if you have an application that you are maintaining and building new stuff on, it's maybe not always worth it to update to the newest version, especially if it's a standard release, because then you have to update the next year. If you only go for the LTS versions, long-term release versions, then you only need to update every 3 years. That being said, updates are quite painless these days. Most applications you can just update by changing the target framework from .NET 6 to .NET 7 in this case, and it will mostly work. Some edge cases, of course, but mostly you're good. Coming back to this one. .NET, ever since .NET Core was released, way back when, the target has always been to rewrite .NET from the ground up. It has the same API surface as the old classic .NET framework for the largest part, but it is brand new. It's a brand new implementation ever since .NET Core. And the main thing about this has always been the cross-platform support. No longer is .NET a Windows-only story, but you can go to desktop, web, mobile, cloud, gaming, you name it, even IoT and AI. You can do all this with .NET and so much more. There's Mac support, there's Linux support. It runs everywhere. The road to getting here has been quite long. The first versions of .NET Core had no desktop support, for example, because they wanted to keep this cross-platform. They could not take a dependency on system.windows because then the cross-platform story would be gone. After .NET Core 3, this was handled. You can take platform-specific dependencies into your applications. So actually WinForms, WPF, all that is supported now. Right, the target framework monikers then. And this is actually what I was talking about that you can go platform-specific. If you're writing a class library for .NET 7, you can use the top one, just target .NET 7. And then you have all the cross-platform APIs available for you. Now, as soon as you have, for example, a Windows application, WinForms, WPF, WinUI, then you can target the .NET 7 Windows. That will pull in all the Windows-specific libraries, APIs. From that moment on, you can no longer run that application on Linux, which makes sense. The iOS, macOS, and Android monikers are there for mobile applications with Maui, which is a new version of Xamarin, which we'll get to. An interesting website, if you're diving into this, is APIs of .NET, which is a website containing the entire surface of APIs in .NET. Across all possible versions. So you can just look one up. I have here a screenshot of the system.windows.forms API. And you can see that it has been supported ever since 1.0. It's maybe a bit small, but you see what we're going to. .NET 5.0, 6.0, 7 is supported, and ever since .NET Core 3. So these versions are supported. And then there's some statistics on NuGet usage, upgrade planner usage, and so on. This might be a really handy site for you if you are upgrading older applications and you want to know if it's supported. There is also a Visual Studio extension that can scan your code base and generate a report similar to this one in Excel, so that you know how much of a percentage is compatible with the latest version of .NET. All right, let's jump to C# 11. New version of .NET, new version of the language. Interesting new features here are generic attributes, multi-line string interpolation, list patterns, round string literals, and required members. So required is actually a new keyword in the language. And instead of just talking about it, let me show you. There we go. Is this font size big enough for everyone? People in the back? Bits bigger? All right, let's do this. Let's try 20. Like this? All right, perfect. Okay, so what I have here. I have a console application targeting .NET 7. Freshly installed since yesterday. Just to let you know, you do need the latest version of Visual Studio in order to do .NET 7 applications. So you need to update your Visual Studio to version 17.4. Don't do it over hotel Wi-Fi, it takes a while. All right, going to the program.cs. In case you haven't seen this yet, this is the new way of doing console applications. There is no more main methods, there's no more public class encapsulating everything. That's no longer needed since we have top-level statements in C# 10, I believe. So this is just the application that instantiates a new instance of my class that I have here, and this I will use to demonstrate the new features. First of all, generics. Let's say that we have a property called title, and we have a second one called name. So we all know about attributes, right? We can put an attribute on this property that we have designed ourselves. But have you ever tried writing generic attributes? Ever tried it? Ever needed it? Not a lot of people did, but it was not something that you could do. As a workaround, we had to do something like this. We could not just add a generic type handler in an attribute. It wouldn't work. So if we wanted to do generic attributes, we had to do it like this. We had to add a property that would reflect the parameter type. And then through the constructor of the attribute, we would get the type in. And then using the type of keywords, it would get passed in there, which worked, but was kind of a hassle. So now we can do, no, that's not it. We can do this. This is new in C#11. We have generic attributes now. Looking at the generic attributes, it's just an empty one with a generic marker, as you're used to doing in C#. But now also for attributes. All right. Next on the list is multi-line interpolation. Let's say we have a simple method that looks at name size. And what we want to do is very simple demo. We want to show someone if it's a long name, a average name, or a short name. That's it. So we have a string results, which says your name is, and then we write the results to the console. You might see GitHub Autopilot showing up every once in a while. Trying to ignore it. Okay, so what we want to do here, we want to check the length of the name. And if it's smaller than 3 characters in length, then it's a short name. So what we used to do is write a switch statement that says name.length. Case smaller than 3. Results. Too short sounds a bit harsh. Like this. Right? Your normal switch statement. Now, ever since C#8, we could do this inline. We could add name.length and then switch. Nope. What are you doing? Like this. Then we could just copy this in. Like this. Switch statements inline. This has been there since C#8. I never actually used it, but it was there. It exists. Now with C#11, they're taking this one step further. For example, what we could do since a while is doing string interpolation like this. And we can now add a switch statement here as well. Let's take this one out. So smaller than 3 returns short. Bigger than, let's say, 15 is long. Thank you. And if you want to do the default one, you just add the underscore. Just right. All right, let's go with that. So this is switch statements inside a string interpolation. This might get confusing quite fast, but it's there, we can use it, so why not? Let's get rid of this one. Let me just show you that this works. Oh, you of course have to call the method first. There we go. Anytime now. Would you look at that? My name is just right, which is wrong because my name is Nico, of course. All right, so that's that. Next interesting thing is list patterns. So let's say we have a list, simple array we call list, and let's give it some values. Like this. What we can do now is check what the values of this list are. And by checking the values, I mean we can actually do list is there's one too many here, like this. We are actually checking the structure of the list. So we have a list saying 1, 2, 3, 4, and we are checking if those are the actual values in there. This will return true. If those are the values, will return false otherwise. Now this doesn't look like much since we need to know all of the specific values, but we can use wildcards as well. For example, we can add an underscore here, meaning that now it has to be 1, whatever, 3, 4. But there needs to be one element there. So 4 elements and 3 of them need to be those specific values. Or we can go for a range. Like this. So the first element needs to be a 1, the final element needs to be a 4, and there can be infinite elements in between. Or finally, let's put the 2 back. We can add some logic in there as well. So a 1, a 2, something smaller than 4, and a 4. Those are list patterns that we can use in C#11. Right, let's forget about this for a moment, and let's go to literals. All right, let me show you the result first. So literals is a class that I've prepared up front, and what it does in its constructor, it prints some text that has a specific layout. So this, what you see up here is one string, which has some indentations, some quotes in there. Some parts are more indented than others, and so on. I can imagine you've all done something like this, so you know what you need to do for escaping characters and putting extra tabs in there and whatnot. Well, they've just made that easier. Here's the text, one string. Do note that it starts with 3 quotes, 3 quote signs. And then I just added the indentation in there. And because of the 3 quotes, it just parses it as is. Even more, since there are 3 quotes, it ignores this one. So the actual keyword, so to speak, the actual symbol that you need to trigger the formatting is 2 quotes. Every extra quote that you are adding ignores quotes in the text. So if you want quotes in quotes in quotes, then you need to add more. But no more escaping characters, and this is much more readable than whatever we needed to do in the past. And we can take this even further. So I have two properties here, longitude, latitude. They are getting some values. Let me just print a location here. We don't care about that one. Okay, so with this one, I want to show curly braces while using string interpolation, right, which are the same symbols. So by adding two $signs and then the three brackets, or the three quotes, I actually can get it to ignore the outer braces, the outer curly braces. Let me just show you what happens. Come on. As you can see, the outer braces are being printed, so it ignored them completely. The inner ones it used to get its values in there, to do the string interpolation. So, that is that. When we were back at the slides, I mentioned that there's a new keyword in C#, right? The required keyword. Required is something that you can use to mark your properties as required properties. Now, these properties need to have values before the application will actually compile. If I try to build this, there we go. I get two build errors saying that those two required members need to be set in either the object initializer or in the constructor. But I am setting them in the constructor right here. Which is true, but the compiler can't see this. He can't be certain. So if you want to fix this, we need to go back to here where we instantiate the class. And we can use the object initializer. Let's just put it to empty strings, or like this. That's fine as well. And now it compiles. I don't know if you can see it, but it said build succeeded. So that works. But this means that you need to know the values that you are setting up front as soon as you initialize this. Maybe you don't want this. Maybe you want to do this in the constructor, as was done initially. So let's remove this again. Like that. Let's go back to the literals class. There is also a new attribute that you can use to decorate your constructor that says sets required members. And this is nothing more than a promise to your compiler, saying that I, as a developer, I know what I'm doing, famous last words, and I promise you, dear compiler, that I am setting all the required members in the constructor of this class. That's all it does. It doesn't check anything. It's just a promise to your compiler from you as a developer. Once again, if I build this, it just succeeds. So everything should work again. There we go. So I think required will be showing up in code bases quite soon. It's in the .NET code base. It's there in certain places already. But I think this is a very useful keyword, and we will see it being used quite often. All right, let's jump back to the slides. So this was a short introduction into C#11. There's much more in there, much more interesting things. A couple of them I have mentioned completely at the end of this presentation. But for me, these were the things that stand out the most as a simple developer. So, .NET 7. .NET 7, apart from C#11, it does have some breaking changes, which is normal, new version. There's a complete list of this in this link, or behind this link. It's mostly edge cases, APIs that are hardly used, that are gone, or APIs that have really specific use cases that the signature changes a bit. Nothing that you will run into if you're just writing line of business applications. I'm quite certain. So C# 11 we've talked about, and then there's MAUI. Is there anyone who has never heard of MAUI? A couple of people. Okay. Who has never heard of Xamarin? Okay, also a couple. So Xamarin is Microsoft's cross-platform mobile solution. You can write Android and iOS applications using C#. And it's basically wrappers around Java and Objective-C or Swift, I guess. And it generates native mobile applications. MAUI is the new version of Xamarin Forms. It's Xamarin Forms 5 then, I guess. And they changed it drastically, which explains the new name. So MAUI stands for Multi-Application User Interface. The interesting thing about MAUI is that it's also an island somewhere in the world, which makes it fun to look things up online about MAUI. But okay, it is what it is. Completely new way of developing cross-platform applications. And I will show you a demo of that in a minute. Very fun one. JavaScript interop on WebAssembly. We've heard of Blazor, right? We can write web applications using C#, which runs natively in the browser without needing JavaScript. Right? We can do C# in the browser, it runs in the browser, no servers. Using Blazor, we can inject JavaScript into our C#. What they are experimenting with now, and this is not stable release yet, but it is in there in .NET 7. We can now inject C# into JavaScript. We can use C#, which is typically a server language, on the front end of your JavaScript-based web application and call into those methods without needing a server. It's all WebAssembly. I have a demo of this later on. And then there's native container support. We can create an MVC application and we can add Docker support in there straight from the start. No needs to manually create a Docker file, put everything in there. We just add a NuGet package and it does everything for us. I just explained all this. Okay, so MAUI. What's new in MAUI? If you took a Xamarin Forms project and you created a new application that needed to run on Android and iOS, you would get a solution with 3 projects. You have a shared project containing all your shared code, your XAML. XAML is used for the layouts of your mobile application. You have an Android application, you have an iOS application. What happened was, those 2, what they call heads, the platforms that you target, they reference the library, right? And it pulls in all the shared code, compiles it natively for that platform, and then runs it. So they've done away with that. It still happens under the hood this way, but instead of needing to manage 3 different projects, you now just have the one. Not only that, but we can also use Blazor to write mobile applications on your phone. This I just explained. Then there is gRPC transcoding. So gRPC, anyone using it? All right, a couple of people, good. gRPC is a way of transporting data, similar to what REST is doing over JSON or XML. With gRPC, you do this in a binary way. And it stands for Google's Remote Procedure Call. Yeah, that was it. So it's a binary way, meaning that you can no longer read the message that's being sent over the line, but in return you get performance. Your payload is so small that it's really, really fast. The problem is gRPC uses HTTP 2, which is not supported, or very basic support on browsers. So it's not feasible to change all REST calls to gRPC calls from the browser to the backend. That won't work. In order to kind of support this, they have built a way to kind of wrap a gRPC service in a REST service. So you can do it completely REST style. The binary payload gets translated into JSON. So that's there in the first release now. Container support I've mentioned. Let's take a look. All right. We'll start with a new Maui project. So if you look at your templates now, you have a Maui app and a Maui Blazor app. The Maui app just uses your basic XAML C# to write applications. If you choose a Blazor app, you get C# and you get Razor support for writing your interface. Now, if you ever take a look at the Blazor templates, you will notice that there is one XAML page in there, and that has a Blazor web view. And that Blazor web view loads in your Blazor controls and renders everything. That name does not correctly explain what's happening. The control being called a web view would kind of suggest that the controls being rendered are not native. It's kind of like you have a web view in your application and you're rendering an HTML app. That is not what is happening. What's actually happening is the Razor syntax that you have written is being translated to native controls. Your app is still 100% native. No web view involved. That's important to know. And kind of confusing. Imagine that, Microsoft being confusing. All right, so I'm creating, and here in the wizard you can actually select which version that you want to use. And they also mention the support level, which is good. So I'm going to use .NET 7 and create a new Maui version. So Maui was supposed to ship with .NET 6, but they didn't make the time frame. So they kind of shipped it out of band a couple of months ago. And now there are big improvements together with .NET 7. So as mentioned, only one platform now. You have your XAML pages. If you want to do platform-specific stuff in a Maui application, you have the platforms folder, and here are all the available targets. If you look at Windows, you see your startup point of a Windows app. If you look at Android, you see your startup activity. Same for iOS. So these are all platform-native folders. It's mostly compiler magic that's happening here to support the one project structure. If you want to run this, you have your different targets up here. So by default, it's running or it's compiling against Windows, which means it's WinUI. You can choose an Android emulator, or it could also detect a device if you attach one, and then you have your iOS devices. Even for iOS, if you set everything up correctly, you can just attach an iPhone or an iPad over USB to your Windows PC and debug directly on the device. That works. You no longer need to connect over SSH to a MacBook. Okay. Just as an example, let me run this on Windows, which is still the fastest way to do it. The other ones take some more time. I shouldn't have said that. It's being slow. Deploy started. And here we go. There we go. Nice little robots, clickable button, a Windows application. All native stuff, laid out using XAML, programmed using C#. Cool. Now what is new about this in .NET 7 is that we now have a map control. So if I go to NuGet, doesn't want to? Okay, in case this would have worked, I could select the maui.controls.maps, add that NuGet package, and instead of talking about it, let me open this one. edit the project file, scroll down a bit. Here it is. So this is the NuGet package that you need. Now, this might look silly, but there was no map control in Maui. There was one in Xamarin Forms, there was none in Maui, and people were complaining. So now there is. The interesting thing about this, both the map control and this being Maui, if you have ever done ASP.NET MVC using .NET 5, 6, or 7, then this will look very familiar to you. The way that the program.cs, in this case Maui program.cs, is being structured. You have your app builder that's being created. In this case, we configure it to use this class as a startup. We configure it to use the Maui maps, which is a call that comes with the NuGet package. And this is the complete startup. So they are really unifying the way that all the different application types are being started. Which is a good thing, because it makes it easier to go from web development using ASP to mobile development using Maui. One thing that I did needed to do was add a API key for Google Maps. So that I did in the Android manifest in the Android specific folder. Now I can use the maps control like this. And it would just start up and render a map. What kind of map? That depends on the platform that you're using. If you are running this on Android, you will get Google Maps. If you run this on iOS, you will get Apple Maps. If you run this on Windows, you get an error. Nope, no big mess. Why do I get an error? Because it's using WinUI as a Windows target, and WinUI doesn't have a native map control. So what they are doing now is they are working together with the people who create a community toolkit in order to solve this by embedding a web view that uses Google Maps and solve it that way on Windows, while waiting for a native map control to happen, which will happen at some point. But for now, not supported on Windows. It just crashes. Imagine not supporting your own platform. Okay, some other, sorry, was there a question? Huh? Okay. Some other interesting things is we can now use flyouts. We can use flyouts. For example, if we take this label, we can add a flyout base. Context flyout. And then we have a menu flyout. And then a menu flyout item. Let's say we have two of those. There we go. I'm going to remove the map from here, just to make sure it doesn't crash on Windows. But also doing this on an Android emulator takes quite some time to render the map, actually. All right. So what the flyout does is when I will right-click the Hello World label, it will show those menus, flyouts. Why is this important? Because up until now, Maui was really focused on mobile devices, smartphones, tablets. And being able to do this, the right-click options with a mouse, means that they are adding more and more support for PCs, like mouse, keyboards, kind of stuff. All right. Let's continue on a bit because we are running out of time. All right. One thing I really want to show is me typing wrong commands. Let's take this one. Let's make a new directory. What's this called again? Build stuff. All right, so we have the .NET command line. We can do .NET new WASM browser. And WASM browser is the template that enables you to reference .NET code from your JavaScript. So looking at this, we have an HTML file, we have a JavaScript file, program.cs, that will actually launch our WebAssembly. We can just run this. This should start up a local web server and allow me to show the application. There we go. Let's click on it. So that's all this does. Really simple. But looking at the code, so this is the JavaScript file that's in there. It is calling a myClass.greeting. Okay, let's open up this one. This is the myClass. There's a greeting method in there that we have marked as a JS export. Meaning, and we have an import as well right here. As soon as this application starts and the WebAssembly stuff gets loaded and everything, this will export this method for usage within your JavaScript. And this will actually import, in this case, your current location, your URL from your browser window. It will import that into C# lands. We are interrupting between those two. This is a really stupid, simple example. As soon as they take this further, I can imagine this becoming quite powerful. Okay, let's jump back here. So how about Azure support? Azure Web Apps have support for .NET 7, have had it ever since release candidate 1. So that's up there. Azure Functions version 4 supports .NET 7 as well. Mostly because one of the ways of doing Azure Functions is using it out of band. So you can pull whatever runtime inits that you want. Entity Framework also has a new version. Important here is that they have dropped the core moniker from the name. So it's no longer Entity Framework Core, it's just Entity Framework 7. I'm guessing because they've catched up with the numbering. So there was EF6, then there was EF Core 6, now it's just EF7. Important to note here, and that is the difference with the previous version, EF7 does work on .NET 6. Does work on that one as well. So you can safely upgrade to the newest version of Entity Framework while still being on .NET 6, no problem. Some interesting mentions that are new in .NET 7 as well is performance. Performance has become really important for them since a couple of versions. And every new release has more and more fixes or changes to improve performance. It's all small bits and pieces that get faster, but all in all, it should feel more performant. There's a really long, interesting, very technical blog post about this on the Windows blogs, or the Microsoft blogs. If you are interested, definitely go look that up. Apparently, F# is still alive. F# has got a new version, F# 7. Any F sharpers in the room? Oh. Yeah, apparently so. I was surprised to see a new version because I'm not following F#, but it was really mentioned specifically, so maybe there's a new push. Nice. Then there's ARM64. Windows 11 has become, or has been native compiled for ARM64 a while ago, so Visual Studio now runs there as well, and now .NET has native support for ARM64 applications. There's an entire new math library in there, specifically generic math functions. So if you're doing stuff on that, that might be interesting. Minimal APIs, which is a new way of writing REST APIs next to Web API. A lot of APIs in one sentence. Now it gets improved support for OpenAPI, for Swagger. There was not a very simple way to do this. Now it's getting easier. Central package management is a new feature of NuGet. So if you are adding NuGet packages to a project, this gets added either in a packages config file or in your CSprosh in XML elements. But you could get version differences. If you have a solution with different projects, they could get out of sync with each other. And central package management solves this. You could just add a new file. Let me just look, directory.packages.props. And in there you can have it's also XML based. You can have an entry for every project in your solution. And only the top project needs to mention the version number of every package. Then all the other projects in there will just sync with those version numbers. Might make it easier. JetBrains has announced support for CPM in Rider as well, for people who are not using Visual Studio. Then there's the .NET Upgrade Assistant, which is a tool that can help you bring your application to the latest version of .NET. That now has gotten support for Core WCF. WCF developers? Couple? All right. So WCF has not been officially ported to .NET Core or 5.6.7. There is, however, an open source project called Core WCF, which does exactly this. And now Microsoft has officially put an upgrade path in its assistant to go from WCF using the classic framework to Core WCF using, I'm guessing, .NET 6. So they are officially adding support for a community-driven project, which is awesome. So what's next? They are currently planning .NET 8, which will be released November next year, which once again will be a long-term service release. C# 12 will be a part of that release. And if you want to join the discussion, this is the URL to the GitHub of Microsoft, where they are discussing all the new features that they will put into C# 12. This is an open discussion. Anyone can join and give their opinion on certain proposals. Any questions? Yes.
Wait a second before I bring you the microphone, please. Yes, that was my part to say any questions.
Sorry.
Okay, here you go.
Thank you. You mentioned this support for translation from gRPC to JSON, and then you have some sort of REST service. But the whole point of gRPC is that everything goes binary. So I didn't understand quite what does this REST thing do? Because you need to get it at binary.
Yes, the REST thing actually converts your binary payload into JSON just to get more support from browsers. But if you're going server-to-server communication and browsers are not an issue, then I would suggest to just not use it and use the real gRPC using binary communication. It's just a workaround for the lack of HTTP2 compatibility. Yeah, if you want to make server calls over gRPC from your browser, then you will need this.
Yeah, just a second. We also have a couple of questions in Pine and not much time, so I'm just running all over everything. Dima is asking, did I understand correctly? I can debug my project on another device by connecting it via a wire.
I'm assuming that's about the iOS devices?
I have no idea.
I'm assuming that's the question. Yes, you can, as long as you have an Apple developer account.
Okay, and one super quick question. How can I create the template using Visual Audio Code? That was in the beginning, somewhere in the beginning.
What was the question?
How can I create the template using Visual Studio Code? And he said, please, so please answer.
I don't know what the template is, but if you want to use Visual Studio Code to do .NET development, I would advise you to use the .NET CLI to generate the project.
Okay, short and sweet. Who was next? You were next, and I saw the person there.
I have a question. What's the real difference between? For me, it's not completely clear what's the difference between, let's say, Web API, the .NET Core Web API, then making REST API calls via, by example, Azure Functions, and then that's kind of clear. But then there is the minimal API, Web APIs, minimum APIs coming in, and then I get fucking confused.
Minimal APIs are there specifically for when you're writing small APIs. I mean, it's in the name. Yeah, but not everyone runs on Azure. So minimal APIs is just an answer to projects like Node.js, who allow you to write a complete Rust API in one file. And the comments that Microsoft got was, okay, you have this web API framework, which works, which is nice, but out of the box, it has too many files, and the learning curve is too big to get into it. With minimal API, you get this, something similar as Node.js. You get your one file containing your entire API surface. That's the reason for minimal APIs.
Okay, and one more last question right here.
Hi.
Much closer, basically like this.
Like this. Okay then. Hi. Do you see any potential for the WebAssembly feature you just showcased to have us be able to deliver sensitive code to the browser, like encrypted stuff, like or cryptographic keys, sensitive information?
Mm-hmm. I don't know what the status is of cryptography in JavaScript or in frontend, web frontend in general, so I don't really know. But you could definitely do it using this interop. You can use it. You can do it from within C# then. Just realize that you are running in a sandbox environment, being WebAssembly.
Okay, thank you very much, and thank you, Nico. This was a delight. Clap a little.
Thank you.
And now let's all run to have some lunch. We have an hour lunch break, and for the people at home, well, do the same. Bon appetit.